MediaCast number 2. Welcome. And I have to say sorry right off the get-go. Last time I said I don't want to talk about Trump again. And then, of course, we have to talk about Trump again. Well, not actually about Trump, but more about like what happened after Twitter, Facebook, and so on banned him and the effects and implication that it has on the media landscape. And I think that actually is a good point that now many are making out there, taking time to write about it, discuss it. However, I also think that lots of those publications that we read right now and lots of the people talking about it on the news are missing some crucial points. So first of all, again, a quick recap, right? All those platforms, social media platforms, they all banned Trump. Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Spotify, Pornhub, whatever, they all banned Trump. Okay. Now, lots of people that are more liberal, they say, yeah, it was about time, right? And in the last video and last MediaCast, I agreed kind of with that. I said, yeah, well, I understand. I also lean more liberal, so I'm all for it. However, from then a pure freedom of speech point of view, I'm disagreeing, and also I don't think it has the effect that people would think it will have, meaning it's not going to silence him or his followers. They're just going to use other platforms. Plus, it's only his personal account that is blocked, meaning his son is still on there, Ivanka is still on there, Jared is on there, and everybody who is kind of supporting Trump is also still on social media and allowed to have an opinion. So, what's up, right? So now, lots of those platforms like Twitter and so on announced new policy changes, meaning Twitter said you have 5 strikes. If you have 5 strikes, then you're out. So meaning 5 times violating the policy, then your account is going to be gone. Facebook also has some policies now in place. What are those guidelines and what happens if you violate them and so on. Now I think this warrants some more detailed research or detailed analysis for several reasons. One reason or one point that I want to mention first before we dive deeper into this is social media is not a human right. Right? It hasn't been around until 2006-ish or so. We were able to live without it before. We should be able to live without it still. Nevertheless, it's obviously very important for everybody's life, right? So there's no denying that. It's the center of lots of businesses that run on digital platforms. Digital marketing is important. I teach those things, so of course I agree with that. But still, Twitter, Facebook, and so on are all private companies, and of course they can make up their minds, their rules, and so on. If you go into a shopping mall and they don't want to have you there, they can say, "Hey, please leave our shopping mall," which is fair. Then I'm not going to leave my money there. I'm going to leave my money somewhere else. But then again, you can see we're jumping back and forth here from yes, agreeing to disagreeing. But then again, those businesses made themselves so important for communication, everyday life, and so on, that they simply have to live with the fact that they are held up to different standards. And that's something that they're trying to catch up with right now, I think. So Facebook, Twitter, and the like, they realize, okay, we have a big role in society right now. If we want it or we didn't want it, doesn't really matter. And of course they want it. But now they try to figure out like how do they appease us, the users out here, in regards to what we think is right. And then of course they look at the target audience. Target audience mostly liberal, probably, so they try to appease the more liberal audience by then saying, okay, no hate speech, no fake news, and so on. Then again, of course, who's deciding what's fake news? Can we believe them? And so on. We discussed this in the last MediaCast, right? So there's no need to rehash it, of course. What's interesting now, though, and that's what I want to discuss, is that lots of people simply say that social media is kind of a human right, and that it's not the case, right? So that's the one thing we need to get out of the system right away. It's not a human right, and freedom of speech, which like our American friends are so proud of and so adamant that this is like in the center of the discussion. That's freedom of speech. So Trump shouldn't be banned because everyone is allowed to say everything. Yeah, that's true, but freedom of speech, as far as I understand, at least the American is it a constitution? Whatever you guys call it over there. Freedom of speech means you're free of being persecuted by the government, so you can say anything and the government will not throw you in jail for that. But Facebook, Twitter, and so on are not the government. So if you say something that they don't like, they can still kick you off. If you come to my shop and you say something that I don't like in my shop, I can kick you out, right? So that's what they are doing. I also, and I have to read it because our chancellor meaning Angela Merkel, and because as you know I'm German, so she said that the right to freedom of opinion is of fundamental importance, and it's problematic that the president's accounts have been permanently suspended. So our chancellor kind of agrees with this. So she says you should have your opinion, and if you suspend those accounts, then what does it lead to, right? Lots of people pointed out that, for example, Khomeini from Iran is on Twitter and usually incites violence, like, hey, take down Americans, death to America, and so on, right? But he's still on Twitter. Why? Then Twitter clarified we have different rules for head of states because it's important for the world to see how they are acting, what they are saying, and the like. Now Twitter changed this with the updated policies, I believe. This 5 strike things and you're out. Oh, I think that also applies to head of states. Not sure. I have to check. Nevertheless, you can see that this is a very difficult issue here, right? Even politicians disagree on that and some say yes, it's important to block or to censor fake news, and if that Trump is inciting violence and so on. Others say it should still be on there so that everyone can see it and then react appropriately. What is very interesting, though, and why this is such a big problem is, of course, that social media is fundamentally different to any other kind of media. Other kind of media, BBC, NBC, newspapers, and so on, you have editors, right, in charge, saying, okay, write this, rewrite this, check this, recheck, change it before it's going to be published or going on air. Social media, you don't. I mean, yeah, professional social media outlets, sure, but Trump can say whatever he wants. For example, it's not necessarily being double checked, which might be a problem or might have been a problem. So there's a big difference. And also it reaches people unfiltered, right? In the news, you have news anchors who try to make sense of whatever is happening and try to help us understand. But of course, that's not always working. And on social media, even less so, because you don't have someone who tries to help you to understand something. You get the facts or information thrown at you, and you try to make sense by yourself, and then you struggle, and then someone like Trump is there and tries to make sense for you. You think that sounds reasonable, I believe him, and then you follow that person, right? So that's a problem, and I think that's rather obvious why. Also, also also another difference is that in traditional media, you actively choose the content that you're consuming, right? So you say, I'm going to switch into channel 1 to 3 or whatever. I'm going to read this and that newspaper. You actively decide which content you're consuming. On social media, the content finds you. And of course, here we're talking filter bubble, echo chamber, meaning the content that you agree with the most maybe finds you, that's then you're in your bubble, or the content that triggers you the most finds you. So then you read something about those liberal snowflakes and what they're doing, and then more of those articles will find you, more of those posts will find you, and you get more angry and angry and angry to the point that you say, okay, I'm going to show them and I'm going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. So this is another big problem when it comes to social media. Keep in mind, I'm teaching digital marketing. I do digital marketing and new media studies and so on. So I like all those things. I'm a big fan of all things digital, but we have to understand that there are issues and problems that we're facing. And if you know that, then we can tackle them, of course. So now that we understand the issues, right, the question is what to do. And that's now where Facebook, Twitter, and so on are at. They're like, okay, we see there are problems. What are we gonna do? Do we self-censor, or do we act based on what we believe is right, or do we wait for governments to tell us what we have to do? So there are governments out there. Turkey, for example, banned WhatsApp and said we create our own WhatsApp. Not sure if that's better, obviously, right? But if you look at it, the media landscape, social media in particular, is very US centric, right? So now, of course, there are other platforms like Telegram, more Russian centric, Signal, again from the US, that are trying to kind of change that, but that remains a problem. Of course, you have China that does all their own stuff. In Russia, like I said, okay, Telegram maybe, but then they have, of course, also like different search engines with Yandex and the like. So there's a discrepancy out there, obviously. So it's hard to make rules for everyone, right? And then Facebook is a US company, and they make rules, guidelines that they want to stick to. Then how does it work for other countries? Is the question. Same rules, different rules. Who decides what can be said, what can't be said? Those are questions that need to be answered, and it's of course very difficult here. And obviously, lots of governments would like to influence social media networks in the rule and decision making in order to get favorable, I don't know, coverage, or at least drown out the unfavorable one. One of the questions that's been out there for a while, right, has been, could the violence have been prevented if Facebook, Twitter, and the like would have censored Trump sooner? And the answer is maybe. But does he really need Facebook, Twitter to tell people to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue? Wouldn't his supporters have heard it via Alex Jones, via different outlets, anyways? Couldn't his supporters have tweeted that? His son-in-law, he talks to more often probably. Couldn't they have tweeted that, or passed on the message to the supporters? So answering this question is, of course, very difficult. And personally, I still believe that freedom of speech, even though it's not a human right and it's not in the Constitution, or it is in the Constitution, but it only means that you're free from government persecution and not from private company censorship, so to speak. I still think that's important because people should see what those others are saying. I think it's important that people see what Trump is saying, for example, in order to see what he's really about. But again, that's just me, and you can see that in the last 15 minutes I went back and forth with the argument. So it's a really difficult argument to make and to discuss. If you are searching for news on the topic and you will come across the Harvard Business Review, for example, they say even they disagree within their own publication. And they have like one article that says it was time that Twitter and Facebook banned Trump. Another article says, but freedom of speech. Then you look at the New York Times, that says now social media grows a conscience, and I agree with that. So now they do. Why now? Why didn't they do this with Khomeini, for example, inciting violence? Why didn't they do it back then when terrorists were using it, when ISIS was using it, and so on? Right? Why do they do it now? Now because it affects the bottom line. Because now liberals, possible target audience, would use less of their services because they're disappointed. So they're like, hey, we appease you now, so you keep using us. Is that a driving factor? What drives Facebook, Twitter, and the like right now to act like this? Is it because they are good people, or is it because they fear for the bottom line? Right? Good point that the New York Times is raising there. I think I see myself agreeing a little bit with this, and I haven't agreed with the Times in quite a while. But yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, why now? Is because they said, okay, that's enough now. Thus far, not further. The line is drawn here, or is it just, well, because if the advertisers see that anyone can say crazy stuff on their platform, then they're not going to advertise anymore. Yeah, so answer this question for yourself and let me know what you think, because this is definitely a discussion to be had and to be had in more detail. Another headline, and I'm just looking at this in the Indian Express, and I found it very interesting, says social media platforms need to commit to a consistent refusal to help heads of state incite violence. So they basically say social media companies should always censor heads of state if they are inciting violence, which sounds reasonable. Like, yeah, of course, we don't want any violence anywhere. But if you don't see that Khomeini, whoever, Erdogan, whatever, whoever says something crazy, stupid, dangerous, then you can't react to it, right? Isn't it be better to see it and say, hey, look at what he said? That's crazy. Let's be prepared, or let's do something against it, rather than being surprised by it. And then again, of course, freedom of speech argument, freedom of opinion, expression, and the like. I don't like that like the realization, but I'm with Angie. And when I was young, I was like, I'm not going to vote for her party and I'm not going to vote for her. But the older I get, the more I agree with her, surprisingly. So in this case, I'm with our chancellor saying freedom of opinion is important. Also because if you censor someone, his or her, their followers will be more mad, will go crazy and say, okay, you censor him because you have something to hide. And now we're even more extreme and more hardcore and are more willing to risk our lives to do something stupid, like storming the Capitol, for example. Yeah, the last article that I would recommend, because it's controversial in my opinion, it's the one that I mentioned from the Harvard Business Review, saying social media companies should self-regulate now. And that's the one that I hardcore disagree with, because then again, who's in charge of the regulation, right? Who's the regulator? Warren G and Nate Dogg. Rest in peace, Nate Dogg. Okay, that was for old people. But yeah, serious question though. Who's going to regulate? Like, who decides what are those 5 strikes? Jack Dorsey? What if Jack Dorsey goes back to Bali to his yoga retreat, missing in action, and then can't decide what's right or wrong? What if he has a change in conscience? What if he starts to hate yoga retreats and starts to become hardcore? I know economist, kind of like the Barney Stinson development, and then it's only about making money. Can you just change this to what Twitter stands for right now, and then whatever, I don't care as long as they pay me the most amount of money. Everyone can say whatever they want. Will it become another Parler, for example? Yeah, who's to say? So this argument needs to be had on a bigger level, needs to be had for a longer time. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you guys are thinking there, and I'm going to discuss this in some of my classes. That's why I'm also not voicing too many opinions right now, not too many specific opinions, because I don't want my students to copy that and say, hey, I heard what you said, so I'm just going to repeat your ideas to give me an A, because that's not how it works. I want critical thinking out there. So I will recap, hopefully in one of the next videos, what we discussed in our classes, and then maybe add some of my ideas as well. And then hopefully we get to not the bottom of that, because I don't think there's a bottom, but we hopefully have a few more ideas to discuss and to see where this is going, especially on a global scale, not only in the US, because I mean, yeah, it's all US centric, but it also affects us here in Thailand and Germany, wherever. So those are discussions that we should be having, and I am looking forward to having this discussion rather soon. In the meantime, enter catchphrase here. Leave your comments down below. Like, share, subscribe on all the platforms as well as on YouTube. It's also on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, anywhere you want. Let me know what you want to talk about, what you want to have discussed. In the future, there will be topics discussed in more detail, analyzed, and then we will hopefully have conversations about this. Until then, take care, stay safe, and see you for the next one.